Hello and welcome to the very first Fast Talk Tuesday. I'm Nicole Papiano for your instructional designer. And the whole concept between these Fast Talk Tuesdays is going to be to cover very narrow topics in L&D, 10 minutes of talk, 10 minutes of Q&A, and really help to spread the wealth through live streaming because we believe this is a great social learning tool for organizations and individuals alike. So today's topic is crafting a workplace culture that gets people excited and engaged, even if you're working remotely or on a team that's hybrid or otherwise dispersed. So why I picked this topic as our first one? Well, first and foremost, I think a lot of us are still trying to figure out that wonderful balance between work from home life and work as a team life now that, we've been kind of brought into this wonderful space of remote work. And the other reason I've done this is because we've recently been hiring a intern. So we've been doing interviews and I've been getting a lot of questions about the work culture at your instructional designer. Somebody even asked, hey, you have a remote team. So I guess it's weird to ask this, the theme was kind of like, it's strange to ask this question because, since you're all a remote team, you probably don't have a work culture. But hold the presses because we have a great work culture at your instructional designer. So let's talk about how to build a great workplace culture and really make it count even when you are working remotely. And if you're watching this, just know that if you're dropping comments for me on the thread below, that I will get them. I'm actually just gonna hop on LinkedIn to make sure I'm not missing anything, but I should see them here in StreamYard. So please chat in your thoughts. So I wanna hear about your workplace cultures now. Do you feel connected to your teams? Do you feel like you have a work culture, and how would you describe it? So I'd love for you to chat that in as I'm moving on to some of these key points. All right, so let's hop right in then. The first and foremost, most important thing that you need to know if you're thinking about how to build your workplace culture is that your culture already exists, whether you want it to or not, and hopefully it's a great one that is really focused on collaboration and teamwork and getting the bigger vision accomplished. But if it's not where you want it to be, or you just haven't really taken the time to define it, then again, this is for you. So hopping right in. Valuing people. This is really at the top of the chart. Your workplace culture is going to simply evolve through the interactions that you have. And if you don't have a sort of people first, value driven idea of how you want your organization to operate and how you want people to connect with one another, then they're going to know that pretty quickly. But what does that actually mean? What does it mean to value people, especially in a remote culture? And so there is, an element of, are you listening to the people you work with? Are you actually implementing the things that they're asking for? Are you shrugging them off? Do a little check-in with yourself and see if you feel that your value of your employees is coming across in the things that you do and you say. One of the easy low-hanging fruits here is opportunities for growth. And so at your instructional designer, what we do is we take time regularly to check in about what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? How can I help you as your leader? And so we've actually done the skills inventory in Miro. So, we took a list and we said, these are the skills I have and that I want to keep using. These are the skills that I don't have but want to use. These are the skills that I don't have but want to adapt or adopt. And these are the skills that I have and that I hope no one asks me to use because I don't actually like using them. I'm just good at it. And so we've taken time to really map that out. And then from there, as a supervisor, as a leader, I can then say, okay, well, these are the areas I want to work with. If you're managing from the bottom up and you don't have the opportunity to shape the culture in that way, right? You're not maybe the top of the food chain, then you should try this exercise anyway and bring it in as a talking piece. Say, hey, boss, I want to schedule 10, 15 minutes with you on a phone call. It doesn't even have to be a Zoom to talk about these things. Which brings me to my next point. Are you doing regular checkpoints and check-ins? So I've had two very different work environments recently. I'm a co-founder in another organization with, a very different work life culture and sort of different people there. And then I'm in my own organization where, the culture is very much something I can help to shape more specifically. And so what I would say is one work culture really focuses on a lot of meetings and a lot of check-ins. And, I gotta say it wasn't necessarily vibing for me. But you've got to see what your audience wants. And so personally, I would say I would lose the regular meetings as in like, let's just tell everybody what we're doing. The whole team meets and we sit there and discuss. And then we have to go through the thing that I assigned you and we have to make sure you did it right. That feels a little micromanagey to me. What you want to do instead is offer your remote team opportunities to check in regularly about the big stuff. How are you doing? Do you feel like your expectations are clear? Do you need help with anything? Those are the kinds of check-ins you want to have regularly. Now, checkpoints can be facilitated by project milestones or just, regularly kind of nudging people to see where they're at. So if you're doing a huge project, let's say you're building a 100-course library, you should figure out where you need to have those checkpoints and don't just wait till the end to do a project postmortem. The other thing I would say that's worked really well for us is balancing our meetings with our work tools. So, we will do a meeting once a month. We have now a regularly scheduled team meeting and we treat those as workshops. So we bring everybody online ready to collaborate and facilitate discussion. We don't bring people together just to check in on how they're doing on their work. Again, I say that we never do that because I'm not there to surveil them. And I would encourage you to consider that. And then we have check-in. So if somebody on the team knows they need a meeting to work on something, they send that nudge off. They create a meeting on somebody's Calendly and we use the tools that way. So we aren't doing like stand-ups in the way that maybe a Scrum team might do or a sprint team, but you should think about how to best organize your checkpoints and your check-ins so that they work for your team. Now, it's all going to come down to systems that support as well. So do you have the right systems in place to encourage genuine collaboration and communication? Collaborative documents are really important if you're on a remote team. So Google Docs is great. Microsoft Office 365 has great collaboration tools. They aren't the only ones, but at a very basic level, somebody should be able to give feedback and they should be able to work in a document at the same time synchronously, because that's where a lot of the brain tools and brain power happens. Then you should be able to think about, do I need other kinds of spaces? So again, I've talked about Miro. We find a lot of value in having Miro as a tool, but that's not the only one. We also use Workplace by Meta, which is a system we also use for our clients' social learning networks. And we love that tool because we can house our resource library there, but it also gives us a good working cadence. So in our work groups, we can post things that we want people to visit on their own time. In our chats, we can make sure we're focusing our conversations on the right people, and then they're very searchable and easy to find. Then we have Loom. So if I need to record something because, my one employee is in the Philippines and they're on a different working time than I am, or if, my other employee is, out of office that day, we want to make sure nobody has to wait for somebody else to be able to do their job. And we also want to be able to capture things so that we don't have to repeat them again and again and again. And this has been part of the work culture, right? It's let's all be efficient, let's all be collaborative, let's all be communicative, and let's make sure that you feel confident in what you are going to do next. So, do your system support the work culture that you want to have? If there's no way for people to speak to each other, if the only way is through these really narrow channels, if everybody has to filter through the boss, if the boss won't answer any calls for anybody, those are some things to think about. We talked about this one already, but clear expectations. Are you being clear in your expectations? Document them, send them off. I can say that is really helpful, and make sure you are having those conversations with your team about what they want to be expected to do, about whether they're clear about their expectations and whether you're defining them clearly. And then, of course, that means you're going to have accountable leadership. If you want a great work culture, it's going to have to not come from the top down. It's an ecosystem for sure, but you really need leadership to invest. Once they check out, so does everybody else. So how are you encouraging your team to collaborate, to connect? Are you reaching out to people? Are you modeling that? Those things, whether you are in a remote environment or a fully face-to-face environment, are all essential. So at this point, I'm going to take questions if there are any. And if there aren't, then I'll just keep talking to myself for a few minutes. But I would love to know what questions you have about, those 6 things that we talked about. So valuing people, creating opportunities for growth, making sure you've aligned your checkpoints and check-ins to the kind of culture you want, having systems that support the kind of culture you want, having clear expectations for everybody, and having accountable leadership. So while I wait to see if there are any questions, I'm just going to pose the question that I know I've been asked many times, which is really about, again, you have this remote culture. So how do you create that culture even to begin? Some of these are supportive. And I think I want to ask you all to ask yourselves, what are my guiding principles? That's been a really big one. So we really spell out our mission or purpose. Some people like the word purpose better than mission. And the guiding principles, we have 6 pillars upon which we do everything. And I think putting those into words has really helped us all to get behind it and to make sure that we are all on the same page. All right, so I see a few of you are out there. Anyone, questions I can answer for you? Comments about your own work cultures or ones you've experienced before that you'd like to think about, talk about, give a shout out to? Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, John. We'll be doing this every Tuesday for the next 4 weeks, 10-minute talk and then 10 minutes of Q&A. So I am really excited. It would be great if you want to message me and let me know whether you thought this format was useful and valuable, whether there's topics you'd like to hear about. We are definitely, experimenting and exploring. That's an important part of our values as well. Oh, here's a great question. I'm going to pop this one up. So we're struggling with culture change at my workplace. How does an organization establish a culture and consistency with certain policies such as telework when the decision is left up to supervisors? I think ultimately, one of the things I would ask is, how have your supervisors been trained to implement these cultural changes, or how are they? A lot of times it's a communication issue, right? That's one of the other things. So one, if you have supervisors that can't live, breathe, and support the work culture you want to have in place, then I think it's worth, this is probably not something that us and L&D can solve, but it's really worth the organization asking, are these the people we want to have in place? And if they are, how can we better support them in supporting their teams? It sounds like management training is needed, or there might be some issues with comms. And so that could just be really easy. I think people get really hung up in we need to do everything in training. We need to have these formal experiences. But, is there a document somewhere that outlines the mission and the vision? Are there general communications that support the things you want to be doing? So maybe it's about reminding people to think about their goals. Maybe it's about reminding people to check in on your latest training that's available to take, optionally. Maybe it's about a goal or a big vision that the whole company is supposed to be marching towards. Apple wants to launch their latest product. It might be about doing some fun internal marketing to get everybody behind that, and really modeling what that might look like. I think, it is hard when everybody kind of has their own way, but there's lots of ways for everybody to do it with their own style if they're all working under the same united vision. So I would probably ask you if you feel like that culture has been defined. And then what are some valuable training topics to cover with supervisors to help them embrace change and implement a hybrid workforce? Another great question. You might want to put them through some change management training. There is specific management training around that. Difficult conversations might be a part of it. If it's, layoff related, for instance, your team is probably going to be lacking trust in your vision right now. And so you're going to have to do things that are trust building. So difficult conversations and trust building. You're going to want to do some communication training in general. If your L&D team can support with learning campaigns and other stuff that isn't necessarily hard training, things that will extend beyond, a one-time event, that's going to help build a culture rather than an event. Other valuable training topics. I'm just trying to think back to when I was a supervisor. Not that I'm not still a supervisor, but what was really hard when I was in the first time in that role. And I think it usually comes down to like conflict management and strategy, knowing how to kind of manage your time, but not just, blocks of your day, but actually how to prioritize the things that are important. So if this change in culture and change in approach is really important, then like that should be the thing that's being prioritized, maybe not, getting out an email to Bob in accounting. That doesn't have to be done today. So learning how to manage their time is kind of important. And I think making them feel safe and secure. Sometimes managers don't want to pass down the change because they are afraid. And so do you have a culture that promotes fear? Do you have a culture where when people mess up, they're reprimanded publicly? I think those are some of the things you want to ask yourself, like why? Why are the supervisors having such a hard time with this? And that might also give you some insights into the kinds of communications or training or mentoring programs that you would need to put in place. I would love to hear more about that though. So, what are you finding? Like, is there a reason you think people are resistant to making this culture change, or maybe just slow, even if they're not resistant? And while I pose that question back to you, the other thing I'd say is we know this as learning designers, but there's this concept of what's in it for me. And a lot of times when we do these big culture changes, it becomes about the organization and how we're going into the future and all of these things. And we forget to ask what's here for our employees? Like, what's the why? Why should they want to do this? What's good about it for them? Apologies if you hear my dog. Cupid is a lovely guard dog. But, so what is in it for them? Have you communicated that? Are you able to demonstrate it? Yes. Here's another great question. Would having some virtual working rooms constitute micromanagement, have some 2-hour focused work and taking accountability to each other? I think that's a great question. And again, it's going to depend a little bit on, I think, how you're using those rooms. And so if it is like, come in here and let me watch you work, obviously people are going to feel that. But if it is a more a social learning experience or just a social working experience, I think it can be very valuable to have those open time slots. It's very popular just around our L&D community. You sometimes see these virtual work sessions. I know I'm going to forget Bella's last name right now, but she does them, and Luke Hobson does them, and people do get excited to join in. So maybe ask your team, like, is this something you would find valuable? And that's probably the root of everything I'll tell you today is if you're not asking your team anything, as leaders, you have to make decisions. But if you're not asking them anything and you're just making these decisions about the culture for them, then that's telling them something about your culture too. It's probably not what you want if you're trying to create a collaborative atmosphere. And then I am finding that our 2-hour meetings, because we do those once a month, we'll do a 2-hour meeting. We'll block out a whole day for year ID only work. We've decided this as a team that this is something we want to do and it makes us better. Then we are finding good results with that. And it's about just kind of having a plan and using it like a workshop instead of a meeting. And so most people are uncomfortable and unfamiliar with the shift to virtual. I think that's something that has been underplanned for. There's this idea that because maybe we know how to use Zoom or we like text, that we know how to build great working relationships virtually. And it does take a bit of practice. And I would say just think about the different formats and supporting people in doing them. Just pose it back to them. I like to say, well, what are you doing in face-to-face that you'd like to do virtually? How can we make that happen? So if it's about getting everyone in the same room, do we just all sit on Zoom today? Do we have to create an actual virtual space like in Spatial or Remo or GatherTown? Is it, we want to have little side conversations? Well, then do we need a tool like Workplace by Meta or Teams, by Microsoft that will support these little instant messaging conversations that are kind of like having your work buddy next to you? Is it about having an all hands meeting, and maybe it's a live stream? Like maybe the boss gets up once a year and does that big rah rally like Apple does. Well, do we really need it to be a Teams meeting where everyone can accidentally unmute themselves? Probably not. So you want to think about how you're preparing people to feel confident in using the systems, and then you want to think about what are the most important ways that they communicate and work, and how can you replicate that virtually. Okay, so we are at the end. Technically, I crunched over 1 extra minute because I used the beginning to give our first time spiel, but I hope you found some of that conversation valuable, and feel free to continue the conversation in the comments. I'll definitely check in periodically, but next week we will be doing our next Fast Talk Tuesday, and we hope to continue this in the future. So thank you for joining me for the first one. I look forward to your feedback and your comments. See you soon.